Hello everyone, okay, I hope you're all having a wonderful day. Okay, this video is looking at the comparisons between the US and UK regarding campaign finance and their regulations. This is one area which is on the exam specification as a comparison, and as I've said, if I was the chief examiner, I'd make this the compulsory question, but as you know, that's because I am horrible. So these are some thoughts I had on this question. Again, there are bits on this as well in the textbooks. It's worth reading them. There's that politics review article as well, which is worth reading because you might gain some extra examples and points you could put in. Okay then, so first of all, there are concerns in both countries regarding campaign finance. So if you had a question or analyse the concerns both countries have regarding money in politics, then there are some very similar concerns. The first big concern is what influence do donors have or expect to have for giving money to election campaigns. And there are a number of UK scandals and US scandals around this, which we'll come to in a moment or two. There's the concern about the inequality of donation sizes between the two parties, which can then obviously affect the result. If one party or one side has a lot more money to spend than the other side, that might influence the result. And of course, it helps to lead to this two-party system as well, doesn't it? Where obviously both parties receive most money. And then the transparency of where that money comes from, okay? And again, the issues around that, and which fits into that top point as well to some extent. Now, to remind you, there are a number of UK scandals around this. There's the whole Bernie Ecclestone affair, where for that £1 million he gave to Labour, did this lead to undue influence when Blair exempted Formula One from tobacco advertising ban? In 2015, Conservative MP for Thanet, this is the fighting his seat against Nigel Farage, was accused of overspending in that election. In fact, there's been a few issues with the Conservatives about, because the law says that local money for the local campaign, but then there's certain national spending by the National Party, and there's been some issues about activists being bussed into various constituencies and it being put on the expenses of the National Party, and there's been issues about should that be done with the local party spending. The Electoral Commission has fined the Leave campaign in the EU referendum for overspending, investigating the activities of Aaron Banks, who's a businessman who really supported Leave. And then, of course, there's the latest scandal about this money from Desmond Stewart, whatever his name is, who gave money for that housing development plan, but he also gave money to the Conservatives, and then the housing minister or the local government minister approved of his plans. So there's issues around there as well. So a quick comparison of legislation between the UK and USA, just to remind yourselves. In Britain, we've had the Political Parties Elections and Referendums Act, a bit of a mouthful, which created the Electoral Commission to oversee elections. Political parties had to register with this commission that they were an official political party. Okay, all donations had to be declared, and the commission puts controls on those donations. There's also this law, the Transparency of Lobbying, Non-Party Campaigning and Trade Union Administration Act, which basically that any pressure group, which is mainly trade unions, who spend more than £10,000 or £20,000 in England, must register with the Electoral Commission. And again, it put limitations on the amount which they could spend in the short campaign. So again, there's been accusations, hasn't there, about Labour and the donation sizes to the Labour Party. And again, going back to that very first point we made about influence, was it Unite the Union? Les McCluskey, who led it, was very chummy with Jeremy Corbyn. And what influence did he have over Corbyn, for example? The USA, I'm not going to go over these in detail because this is done in the lesson on the previous PowerPoint, but these are some of the various laws that were passed, and FEC, Citizens United for FEC, of course, is the Supreme Court, which got rid of the essence of those laws. Okay, if you look at the comparison of limits on spending candidate expenditure, in the UK in 2015 general election, the electoral rules were a candidate could spend up to £30,000 on the long campaign, which is basically December to March, and then £8,700 what they call the short campaign, i.e. the month or two immediately before the election. Obviously, in 2019, a lot of people didn't expect that election in December, so obviously they were probably limited more to the 8,700 per constituency because the election was announced, wasn't it, in like April, October time, wasn't it, an election in December. If a political party puts a candidate up in every seat in the country, they can spend up to £19.5 million nationwide. So the UK has put limits on the amount people can spend in elections as a way of trying to create more equity. The USA hasn't really put limits on how much people can actually spend, especially since matching funds were kind of dispensed with in 2008. Hence why the Clinton campaigns spent $497 million and the Trump campaign $247 million. This is just their own campaign and doesn't include things like the pressure groups and stuff as well. If you look at comparing the pressure group donations in the UK and USA, no group in Britain can spend more than $9,750 in a constituency for an election campaign, whereas obviously in the USA they can spend a lot more than that. No limits on the amounts a pressure group can donate to a political party in the UK, but limited in terms of how much a party can spend. So, there's nothing to stop the trade unions giving Labour, or big businessmen giving the Conservatives, hundreds of millions of pounds in theory. But there are limits on how much those parties can spend, which I suppose indirectly limits the amount these groups can give to the parties. In the USA, due to super PACs, means that pressure groups can give unlimited amounts, although not to direct candidate campaigns. They have to run them kind of shadowing them, if you like. Donations to political parties are largely unregulated in the USA as well, which again is not true in Britain. So this is a slide I've just made looking at how countries have sought to deal with campaign finance. So in terms of similarities, well, both countries have passed laws to clarify the sources of money. Okay, when you can mention FECA and you can mention those UK laws. Both countries have largely rejected state funding of political party funding. Now, yes, you could say the USA have matching funds, but then you would say, but these are now no longer in place. In the UK, there's no real state funding for election campaigning of parties. I know there's short money, which the opposition parties get, but that's mainly during the parliamentary year for actually, doing research into government policies, not so much on government spending in elections or party spending in elections, sorry. So both countries have largely rejected state funding of political parties. Both have created some kind of regulator to oversee it, the FEC in America, the Electoral Commission in Britain. Again, you could argue that they're both relatively weak in many ways. The FEC is normally gridlock between the 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans. The Electoral Commission is made up of independent people, but again, it has imposed fines just like the FEC has, but the amounts they've fined have been relatively small compared to the amount of spending which the parties have done. Both have passed laws to try and resolve campaign finance as an issue, and try and create greater equity between the parties, and you could say that both of them have also failed at this as well. You might have that down as a potential point as well. So if you get a question now, analyse the reasons or analyse the ways in which both countries have sought to deal with campaign finance regulations, there are 4 potential points there you could discuss. On the contrary side, you could say, well, the UK laws have focused on overall spending limits of the parties, whereas in the US, the focus has been much more about individual donation sizes. So they've kind of gone at it from different angles. The UK has gone at it from the spending of parties to try and limit it down, as a way of reducing how much people donate. And in the US, it's been done more the other way around, where they've actually tried to limit the campaign donation sizes as opposed to the overall spending which has taken place. You could say that the Electoral Commission in Britain is actually made up of independent people and not members of a main party, unlike the FEC, and therefore perhaps the Electoral Commission potentially has a bit more teeth to it, you might argue, than the FEC. Although you could say in both countries they're kind of, they're not particularly strong, let's put it that way. So there's some of the differences. I suppose another difference is that I suppose in the US the politicians have kind of got to keep an eye out as to what the Supreme Court might say, which might be a limiting factor on their laws and how they've gone about dealing with campaign finance. Whereas in the UK, that's less of an issue because the Supreme Court in Britain can't overturn those things. So there is another difference there which I didn't write down, which is one which you might want to explore. Now, if you want to brush up on the UK on this, because we did this under political parties, it would have been about this time last year, there is a PowerPoint on Teams in the first year politics section on political parties. There's a PowerPoint about party funding. There's also some YouTube clips as well in that section. There's one, for example, that was done before the year 2000 law, looking at how much parties are spending in by-elections, for example. There's a video which I'm going to upload at some point this week about the Robert Jenrick affair as well as a bit of a scandal. So there is stuff there on the UK. Now, potential exam questions. Okay, in the UK bit of the politics course, okay, you could be asked just about UK, like Unit 1 or Unit 2. You could get a question like, evaluate the view that party funding in the UK is in need of reform, or evaluate the view that campaign finance regulations are ineffective because politicians have no incentive. You could get a question around that. In the US politics section, I think it'd be more part of the question as opposed to just campaign finance, but I suppose you could get a question like evaluate the view that party funding in the USA is in need of reform, evaluate the view that campaign finance regulations are ineffective, or they're ineffective due to the Supreme Court. That might be more of a question because then you could say it's the Supreme Court or it's down to politicians passing weak laws. So you could get a dedicated question on campaign finance. I think you're more likely to get a comparative question because it's in the comparative section. So you could get these ones. These are the ones which don't have the theories in them. So, examine the ways in which the US and the UK have both sought to control funding, or why have they failed in both countries, something of that nature. You could get these two, which are the theories ones, which again are very similar. The ways in which the US and UK have sought to control it, again, the ways in which they've both been ineffective. So I think those, 3 reasons why they've been ineffective, why they've sought to control party funding, and perhaps if you can think of 3 similarities in the regulations themselves. And I think the harder one, thinking of 3 differences in the regulations themselves. I think if you have, those points, then you've basically got it covered, I would suggest, on campaign finance. Okay, as ever, any questions or problems on this, then do let me know. But yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.